They said I had no worth alone, but my children's future lies in your hands, human. From stardust to ashes. The artificial rain traced familiar patterns down the curved dome of Meridian Station, creating the illusion of weather where none naturally existed. Beneath the environmental regulator's steady hum, Lyra Vashti crouched in shadow, her ember gold eyes scanning the perimeter of the medical sector. Her children pressed against her sides, 11-year-old Petra with her mother's amber eyes and midnight hair, and 7-year-old Dalen whose fingers twisted nervously in the fabric of his sister's sleeve. Just a little longer, Lyra whispered, her accent crisp and melodic, the last remnant of a culture now scattered like stellar dust across refugee camps throughout the outer systems. Her shoulders strained beneath the weight of a faded indigo cloak, damp from hours spent hidden in the station's recycled precipitation. They shouldn't be here, not in this restricted area, not after curfew, but desperation had driven them beyond the bounds of caution. Dalen's breathing had grown shallow through the night cycle, his small chest rattling with each inhale. Without medical attention, Lyra knew what would follow. She had watched too many children from her homeworld slip away after the evacuation. The rhythmic impact of boots against the grid floor made her freeze. A lone figure approached, moving with practiced efficiency through the half-light. Medical insignia gleamed on his satchel, patches sewn over what appeared to be an older emblem. She ducked her head lower, willing her children to stillness. Being discovered meant processing at best, separation at worst. The footsteps slowed, then stopped. 1 meter away, 2 heartbeats of silence. You shouldn't be here. The voice was low, male, carrying a hint of hesitation beneath its authority. This area is restricted, especially after curfew. Lyra didn't look up. Pride had no place in survival. Instead, she spoke words that tasted like ash. I have nothing to offer but myself, she said, her voice barely audible above the hum of the station. My children need help, human. I could be useful to you. When no immediate response came, she finally raised her gaze. The medic had crouched to her level, his knees cracking audibly. His face was angular, weathered by time and strain rather than age. Dark auburn hair fell across his forehead, and his eyes, a deep storm cloud gray, studied her with something more complex than suspicion. I'm Nikolai, he said after a moment. Not an acceptance of her offer nor a rejection, just a name offered like a small bridge across the void between them. Lyra, she responded, then nodded toward her children, Petra, Dalen. As if summoned by his name, Dalen coughed, a wet, ragged sound that seemed to fill the corridor. Nikolai's attention shifted immediately, professional instinct overriding whatever institutional caution he might have harbored. How long has he been like this? He reached forward but paused before touching the boy, seeking permission with a glance. 3 days, Lyra said. It's the atmospheric adaptation, our physiology. Different oxygen absorption rates, Nikolai finished, his fingers gentle as he checked Dalen's pulse. The station's mix is calibrated for standard human respiration profiles. He stood abruptly, decision made, follow me. Lyra hesitated, suspicion carved deep by experience, to processing. To my quarters, Nikolai replied, adjacent to the medical bay, I have equipment there. Why would you help us? The question escaped before she could suppress it. Nikolai's expression tightened momentarily, because I've seen what happens when people follow protocol instead of conscience. The medic's quarters were Spartan but functional. A single cot, a workstation with monitors displaying medical readouts, and storage compartments built into walls designed to maximize the limited space. Nikolai cleared a surface, transforming it into a small examination area where he could properly assess Dalen. Respiratory inflammation, he concluded after a series of scans, treatable, but he'll need regular monitoring. His gaze met Lyra's. You can stay here tonight, tomorrow we'll figure out something more permanent. Petra, who had remained silent until now, narrowed her eyes. Why would you risk trouble for strangers? Her young voice carried an old wariness. Petra, Lyra admonished softly. But Nikolai shook his head. It's a fair question. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a scarred forearm where an identification chip had clearly been removed. I was combat medical response on Tyrannies 4 during the collapse. Command ordered evacuation, priority personnel only. I stayed behind to treat civilians trapped in the underlevels. His voice grew distant. Saved 8 lives, lost my commission, my clearance, nearly everything. They punished you for saving people. Petra's confusion was genuine. They punished me for disobeying, Nikolai corrected. The system doesn't care about reasons, only results and compliance. Lyra watched him prepare a breathing treatment for Dalen, his movements efficient despite equipment that had seen better days. She recognized something in his isolation, a familiar hollowness carved by choices that left one standing alone. We won't endanger you further, she said, rising, once Dalen is stabilized. And go where? Nikolai interrupted, not unkindly. Unregistered aliens near a restricted section, you wouldn't make it to the lower quadrants before security pulled you in. He shook his head. For now, you're safer here. Later, after the children had fallen into exhausted sleep on his cot, Nikolai handed Lyra a steaming cup. It's just reconstituted tea, not great but warm. She accepted it, allowing the heat to seep into her palms. My husband was executed 6 months ago, she said quietly, offering information as currency. Vasho was a cultural liaison to 3 systems. They claimed he passed restricted information to sympathizers. Did he? Only to his mother, who needed medical treatment unavailable to our people after the sanctions. Her lips curved in a bitter smile. They erased him from our family records. Our marriage was declared invalid. She looked up. By their laws, I no longer exist as a citizen, neither do my children. Nikolai sat across from her, his own cup untouched. How did you get here? A smuggler, former military, I think. I paid with the last of my family heirlooms. Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable but weighted with recognition. 2 souls adrift in a system that had discarded them. I'll help you register under provisional status, Nikolai said finally. Not official records, those would flag your species markers, but enough to move around without immediate detention. Why risk this? Lyra asked, echoing her daughter's earlier question but with different intent. Nikolai's gaze traveled to the sleeping children, then back to her. Because some choices leave marks that remind you who you are. He touched the scar where his military chip had been, and who you refused to become. Days stretched into weeks. Nikolai created temporary identification codes that allowed Lyra and her children limited movement within the station. Dalen's breathing improved with regular treatments, and color returned to his ashen cheeks. Petra began drawing again, creating intricate patterns that mimicked the stellar formations visible through the station's observation ports. Lyra helped in the medical bay when Nikolai was on shift, her quick mind and steady hands proving valuable with the endless stream of minor injuries and illnesses that plagued refugee populations. They developed a rhythm, a careful dance of shared space and purpose. You were something more than cultural liaison's wife before, weren't you? Nikolai asked one evening as they sorted through salvaged medical supplies. Lyra's hands stilled momentarily. I was a xenobiological researcher, specializing in adaptive physiologies. A ghost of pride flickered across her features. My work helped establish the first cross-species colony on Helios Minor. And now you're hiding in a medic's quarters, sorting synth bandages. Now I'm keeping my children alive, she corrected without bitterness. That's worth more than any research. Nikolai nodded, understanding etched in the lines of his face. There's a transport leaving for Eden Colony next month, he said after a pause. Minimal security, mostly automated systems. They need medical personnel and scientists with adaptation experience. Lyra's breath caught. That's outside Meridian jurisdiction. Oh yes. You're suggesting we leave, all of us. I'm suggesting there might be somewhere that values what we can offer without demanding we erase who we are to provide it. His eyes met hers, steady and certain. I've spent 5 years patching wounds in a system that keeps creating them. Maybe it's time to help build something instead. That night after the children were asleep, Lyra moved through the dimly lit quarters, memorizing the space that had become their sanctuary. Her gaze fell upon Nikolai, who had dozed off at his workstation, head resting on one arm. In sleep, the vigilant tension eased from his features, revealing glimpses of who he might have been before loss and disillusionment carved their patterns into him. She approached silently, draping her shawl over his shoulders, a small gesture of care that acknowledged the growing warmth between them. Not romance, not yet, but something equally powerful, recognition. 2 survivors who had found in each other not just safety but possibility. As she turned away, Nikolai's hand caught hers, his touch gentle but present. He didn't speak, and neither did she. They simply existed together in the quiet, their fingers intertwined, while beyond the station walls, distant stars marked paths to worlds where they might begin again. Where children like Petra and Dalen might grow unafraid of the sky. Where a woman once told she had no worth alone might discover otherwise. Where a man who had sacrificed everything to save strangers might find something worth saving for himself. The horizon beyond the domes. The days before departure unfolded in careful measures. Nikolai moved with increased purpose, his gray eyes constantly scanning for threats as he navigated the labyrinthine corridors of Meridian Station. 4 weeks remained until the transport to Eden Colony would accept passengers. 4 weeks of calculated risks, of preparations hidden behind routine movements. Hold still, Lyra murmured, her fingers steadier than her heart as she altered the identification chips Nikolai had procured. They sat together in the dim light of his quarters' maintenance alcove, shoulders nearly touching. The biometric seal needs precision. Nikolai watched her work, studying the intense focus in her amber eyes. Where did you learn this? Survival teaches many skills, she replied, not looking up. After Vasho's execution, I lived among the underground networks for 3 months before finding passage here. A faint smile touched her lips. Did you think I was merely a researcher who happened to marry well? I'm beginning to think you're a force of nature disguised as a refugee, he said, the rare warmth of humor in his voice. She completed the final chip, one for each of them, identities that would grant them passage to Eden without triggering Meridian's security protocols. Not permanent solutions, but bridges to something better. What will you tell your supervisors? Lyra asked, setting aside her tools. That I'm requesting transfer to an outer colony medical post. It's not unusual, many burn out here after a few years. His fingers brushed against hers as he collected the chips. Simple, clean. Nothing about this is simple, she countered softly. No, he agreed, but necessary things rarely are. Petra discovered the transport plan while Nikolai was explaining star charts to Dalen. The girl had been unusually quiet that evening, her amber eyes watching the adults with unnerving perception. We're leaving, she stated rather than asked, interrupting Nikolai's explanation of intersystem navigation. All of us together. Lyra turned from organizing medical supplies. Petra. I heard you talking. Her daughter's chin lifted slightly, a gesture so reminiscent of her father that Lyra's breath caught. When will we go, and what happens if they catch us? Dalen looked up, suddenly alert. Catch us. Nikolai exchanged a glance with Lyra, then motioned for the children to sit beside him. There was no condescension in his manner, only the direct respect he had shown them from the beginning. Yes, we're leaving, he confirmed. In 3 weeks, and if they catch us, he looked directly at Petra, acknowledging her right to the truth, they would separate us. Your mother and you children would be processed through Central Registry. I would face charges for harboring unregistered refugees and falsifying documentation. Then why risk it? Petra's voice was measured beyond her years. Because staying means living half-lives, Lyra said, joining them. Always hidden, always afraid. Eden Colony needs people with our skills. We could build something real there. Dalen's brow furrowed. Will there be sky, real sky? Nikolai nodded. Real sky, real ground beneath your feet, plants that grow in actual soil, not hydroponics bays. And we'll be together, the boy's question was directed at his mother, but his eyes shifted to include Nikolai. Lyra felt something tighten in her chest. In the weeks since they'd found sanctuary in Nikolai's quarters, Dalen had gradually emerged from the shell of silence that had enveloped him after witnessing his father's arrest. He had begun to speak again, to ask questions, to laugh, quiet little sounds at first, then building into something more genuine. And increasingly, those moments of connection included Nikolai. Yes, she promised, reaching out to smooth her son's dark hair. Together. Later, after the children had fallen asleep, Nikolai found Lyra standing by the small viewport in his quarters, her silhouette outlined against the eternal night beyond. They've adapted quickly, he observed, keeping his voice low. Children often do, she replied. They bend instead of breaking. It's adults who shatter under pressure. And you, have you bent or broken? Lyra turned, studying him in the dim light. Nikolai had grown leaner in the weeks since they'd arrived, the demands of their plan taking physical toll. Yet there was a clarifying purpose in him now, a direction that had been missing when she first encountered him in that rain-slick corridor. Neither, she answered finally. I've forged myself into something new. She stepped closer, her voice dropping further. Why Eden? Of all the places we might go, why there? Because it's far enough from central systems to operate with real autonomy. Because its charter was written by scientists and engineers, not politicians and military commanders. His eyes held hers. Because on Eden, your children won't be aliens or refugees, they'll be colonists helping build a world. The truth of what they were attempting settled between them, not just escape, but rebirth. Lyra's hand lifted, hesitant, then rested against Nikolai's cheek. The contact was brief but deliberate, acknowledgement of what had grown between them without either having named it. I never expected to find trust again, she whispered, especially not here. His hand covered hers, warm and calloused from years of medical work. Neither did I. The day before departure brought unexpected chaos. A containment breach in the lower agriculture sector had triggered emergency protocols throughout the station. Security checkpoints multiplied, and automated drones swept residential quarters for unregistered life signs. Nikolai returned from his shift with tension radiating from every line of his body. They're scanning the medical sector next, he said without preamble. We have to move, now. Lyra was already in motion. gathering their meager possessions while Petra helped Dalen into the environmental suit they'd modified for his smaller frame. The transport doesn't board until tomorrow, she reminded him, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. We'll hide in the maintenance tunnels beneath the docking bay, Nikolai replied, tucking their forged credentials into an inner pocket. It's not ideal, but we can't stay here. They moved through the service corridors, Nikolai leading, Lyra guarding their rear, the children between them. The station's emergency lights pulsed in rhythmic crimson, casting their faces in alternating shadow and blood-red illumination. Dalen's breathing quickened with fear, but he remained silent, his small hand clutching his sister's. At a junction where maintenance shafts intersected, a security drone hovered unexpectedly, its scanning beams sweeping the passage. Nikolai thrust out an arm, halting their group just before they would have stepped into its path. They froze, pressed against the cold metal wall, as the mechanical sentinel completed its programmed pattern and drifted onward. Close, Petra whispered. Too close, Nikolai agreed, his voice tight. When they finally reached the access point to the docking bay tunnels, Lyra felt her heart sink. The entrance was sealed with an emergency lockdown protocol, standard procedure during security alerts. Nikolai's override credentials flickered on the panel, denied. Allow me, Lyra said, removing a slender tool from her sleeve. The children watched as their mother manipulated the security panel with practiced precision, her face set in concentration. Where exactly did you learn this? Nikolai asked, keeping watch on the corridor behind them. My people had to develop many skills when the regime decided we were no longer citizens, she replied, not looking up from her work. Electronic systems follow patterns just like biological ones. Find the pattern. The panel emitted a soft tone and the seal retracted, and you can adapt to it. The tunnels were cramped and cold, maintenance shafts never intended for prolonged occupation. They found a recessed alcove near a ventilation junction, far enough from regular patrol routes to offer temporary safety. Dalen curled against his mother, exhaustion finally claiming him despite the circumstances. Petra remained awake, her amber eyes reflecting the minimal emergency lighting as she kept silent vigil. The transport boards at 700, Nikolai murmured, checking the chronometer embedded in his medical bracelet. 10 hours from now. Will the heightened security affect boarding procedures? Lyra asked. It shouldn't. The agricultural breach is contained to lower sectors. By morning, protocols should return to standard operations. He hesitated, then added, but if something goes wrong, if we're separated. We won't be, she interrupted, her tone allowing no alternative. Nikolai studied her in the dim light, the proud angle of her chin, the protective curve of her arm around her sleeping son, the unwavering certainty in her eyes. She had traversed terror and loss to reach this point, had offered herself as currency for her children's safety, had survived when systems and societies deemed her disposable.